in partnership with YouGov Blue, showed that nearly 2/3 of Americans would support breaking up tech firms by undoing recent mergers, such as Facebook's acquisition of Instagram, if it means ensuring more competition in the future. This isn't particularly surprising. Politicians on both sides of the aisle have been ramping up their scrutiny of big tech recently. But as elections near and as the power of these companies continue to grow, will anything actually be done? In conversation with Mark STEFANO of BuzzFeed, please give a big Web Summit welcome to Secretary General of Amnesty International, Kumi, NAIDOO, and European Commissioner Věra JOUROVÁ.
Thank you so much. It's like the set of Terminator backstage. It's very creepy. I want to say thank you so much, Věra and Kumi. It's going to be an amazing conversation because it really does feel as though big tech and whether we break up big tech is the question of this conference. These are US companies, of course, Věra. So there's, as much as the European Union can do, it's still a question for US legislators. What do you think the European Union's role going forward in breaking up big tech companies will be?
Well, first of all, hello. Let me apologize for being just an ordinary, normal person after all those robots here. I really am happy you don't force me to dance, only to answer the question. The role of the European Union is to promote digital technologies and artificial intelligence and to come with the reasonable rules in case something goes wrong. And this is your question. This is a little bit American question, how it sounds to me, whether to break up the digital big companies or not. We are looking at it from different angles. One thing is the competition rules. Because what we see, for instance, in case of Facebook, this accumulation of power through having the advertising business fully under control, plus the possession of the huge amount of private data, it is something we are addressing already by the General Data Protection Regulation, by the GDPR. And also my colleague Margaret Vestager is looking at what they are doing through the competition rules, which are rather strict in the EU. But maybe we will have to renew them, to update them a little bit to capture better the digital reality. Then there are other things we are going to watch at, especially the illegal and harmful content, where we might come with the rules which will clarify this issue. Then, of course, security and cybersecurity issues. So we are going to look at it from different angles, and speaking about breaking up of the companies, this is the last resort solution. We call it atomic bomb, which we really don't want to use. We want to apply our European rules on these companies and to be very strong on enforcement of the rules. The EU is well placed for that, I think, and our member states expect the EU to act and to come with the rules. Also, we are best placed for it, I think, in global scope, because we are not driven by big money, which is the American case, I think. And we are not going Chinese way, when I think that the digital technologies are used by the state for getting more control over the society. So, no, in Europe, we want technologies which serve the people, not vice versa. And we want the technologies to be regulated to the extent which is necessary. Breaking up is not our program.
It's the atomic bomb, is what you're saying.
It's the atomic bomb.
And which company do you think the atomic bomb is coming for? Which company do you think is the one that needs breaking up? Is it Facebook or Google or Amazon?
The companies where the accumulation of power is so huge that when we see that it's not balanced with responsibility, then it's becoming dangerous. But I am not saying that we will use this atomic bomb. I think that the possibility that we could act in this direction is already a quite strong deterrence factor.
Kumi, I want to come to you. There's actually a human rights argument for breaking up big tech companies, that this accumulation of power from these companies has meant that minorities and communities that are subjected to abuse or subjugation from autocratic governments are finding themselves repeatedly outside of US and Europe. They're finding themselves open to abuse by these tech companies. Can I get you to sort of talk about that? What do you think that there's a human rights argument here?
Absolutely, no question about it. I mean, when I was a young activist in South Africa in the 1980s, we used to say information is power. Today, data is power. And the asymmetrical nature of that power is terrifying. We have never had a moment in history where corporations and governments have the kind of access to who we are, who we engage with, what we like, even our medical conditions, because if you have a Fitbit watch, that can be triangulated into the data and so on. So the question about the breakup, for example, it is, of course, a no-brainer that, just Facebook and Google control a global public square of 1/3 of the population of the planet. And as citizens, we are given a devil's choice, right? We are told you can either opt in to use these online resources, and opting in means you have to give up your privacy, give up your autonomy, and allow your data to be commoditized at the first level, but also then to be weaponized, as we saw that happen in the elections, but also it's also being weaponized on an ongoing basis for hate and so on. So you either have an option to opt into that or to opt out to the benefits of the modern world. And that is not the choice that we should be given. And bear in mind, while breakup is where the conversation is, and we as Amnesty would encourage that conversation to go forward, but be careful that that's not going to deal with the problem, because you can break up these companies and still have the same surveillance model, which is what Harvard professor Susanna Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. And really what we are dealing with is today, people used to talk about the military-industrial complex. Today we can talk about the surveillance-industrial complex. So given all of these things, the way things are going is threatening the very definition of what it means to be human, right? And I would like to quote, if you think I'm being dramatic, let me quote
we like dramatic.
Can't you quote me?
Let me quote the ex-CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, when he said, "We know where you are, we know where you've been, we can more or less know what you are thinking about." Is that the path for humanity going forward? That we give that amount of power to one company in the world? This is not what democracy looks like. This is not what empowerment looks like. This is not what good governance looks like. And this is certainly not what protects people's human rights.
There was 10 years ago, there was so much promise around tech companies and social movements. I'm thinking about the Arab Spring, and then we saw social movements like Black Lives Matter really bubble up through Twitter. Do you think that there's a shift that's happened over time, or has there been a point? Where did it go wrong? Where are we at now that we're now discussing it as a true ill and an evil, when really 10 years ago at a conference like this we would have been praising the role of tech?
So let's be very clear. Amnesty International and the other civil society organizations working on this area are not anti-technology. We are pro-technology, and we would align ourselves to many of the comments that Vera just made. We want citizens to be able to access these resources that have many positive benefits, but it should not come at the choice of people without their consent, not only giving up privacy. It's not simply about privacy, it's about giving up your potential to live as an autonomous being with your own identity and so on. I think we did make a mistake a couple years ago. when governments were moving in on regulation, let's be clear, we stood with the tech companies and said to governments, because we were anxious about governments trying to intervene and so on. But I think when we reflect on it, we did not think that some of these tech companies will evolve in a way where they would seek to commodify data in the way that they've done, and that they would allow it to be weaponized. It is absolutely unacceptable, for example, that as we sit in this hall, that Fox News, right, otherwise known by many people as Trump TV, right, has denied the Republican Party and President Trump the right to run certain adverts on Fox News because they said it was factually highly flawed and so on. And now Facebook says we will run it, right? What rights is Facebook defending when they are doing this? Are they defending the right to politicians to lie? That right politicians take for themselves every day of every year. Facebook doesn't need to help politicians to lie, right? Generally speaking. I'm hoping Vera is different. Right? So we don't need Facebook to be, because they're driven by profit, right? And when they got that 5 billion fine, right? For example, I mean, 5 billion pounds fine for Facebook is less than a parking fine. The next day the share price went up, right? And I want to quote the Federal
You've come
Trade
prepared. I love it.
Yeah, the Federal Trade Commissioner, right, who gave the minority judgment in that case, Rohit Chopra, said, the proposed settlement does little to change the business model or practices and imposes no meaningful changes to the company's structure or financial incentives. So we want to continue to be able to draw from the benefits of social media and to be able to communicate messages of justice, how we address climate change and so on, but it should not be at the expense of people without actively making the choice to give up on the privacy, on the right to determine their own identity.
Vera?
Well, it was very interesting for me when I came into this story of data protection newly in 2014 as the Commissioner of the European Union. With my personal history, when I lived half of my life in totalitarian regime. And suddenly I saw, my God, the people don't have any choice. Is it really our current reality? It reminds me of my past before 1989, when we didn't have any choice. We didn't have any freedom to decide the basic things of our lives. And I realized that we are doing the right thing with GDPR, that we are bringing partly. I know that the monster is not so easy to defeat, but partly the people now have more under their control what's happening to their private data. And we have a very intensive debate also with the Federal Trade Commission and the US Congress about whether the United States will come with similar law as GDPR has in Europe, because there is bigger and bigger demand in the United States from the side of the people for being more or better protected. So there is something happening, and I really dream about creating some global standards, at least for the protection of privacy of people.
The argument that the tech companies will roll out is that if you break up them, you'll see companies in China move in on their lawn, and they need to be big to compete against China. And there's no doubt amongst these, both of you, that we want liberal values underpinning companies. Can I get you to respond to that, Vera? What do you think to the argument that it's basically we need to stay big to make sure that China's tech companies don't get out of control?
I don't see any reason why the European Union should be the battlefield between the United States and China on this. We have our rules, we have our high level of protection of Europeans. When the companies want to operate on the European market, be it American or Chinese ones, they have to respect our laws. And if not, we will sanction them. And those 5 billion of the sanction, it referred back to 2011 law. So that's why I mentioned that in America something is happening to upgrade it, because inevitably we have to react on it so that the sanctions are not only a pocket money of the bosses of the giants. In GDPR we have 4% of annual world turnover. This is something which might keep them disciplined.
Yeah. Kumi, on China?
So when Amnesty was campaigning against Google's Dragonfly project in China, one of the arguments that Google gave was, oh, Chinese tech companies are going to be much worse than we would be, right? This is not about lowering the bar. This is about lifting the bar to higher standards. It's like saying that in country X that has child labor, and if the US were to do child labor, they would do it better than our country X would do it. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. We should not have any children on any factory floor, for example. So similarly, the idea of using China as an excuse on this question is not helpful. And I have to say, pay tribute here, that Google Dragonfly would never have been defeated were it not for decent workers in those companies, tech workers who organize themselves as a tech workers coalition. And I use this opportunity here to appeal to each and every one of you who are workers in the range of companies. We rely on you to stand up for human decency, for justice and human rights, and to stand up against malpractices by your leadership, like many of you are willing to do. And we honor those of you who have stood up and partnered with us. And we will continue to work with you to defend the rights of all human beings on this planet to have a just access to the tools of the internet and social media.
We've got about a minute to go. So, Vera, I want to just sort of ask you, this is the second time you've been at Web Summit. Last year was your first. I mean, this year, a lot of the conversation is around big tech breaking up. If you're going to be here next year, 12 months from now, do you see, what action do you see between now and then? What can actually be concrete things that are going to happen?
It will be after the American presidential elections, no?
Well, around the same time.
Around.
That's it.
I think that the debate will be to what extent the tech should be regulating what's politically correct, what's the truth, what's false. I think that we will have to speak about whether it's not dangerous too much for our democracy and for the way we love to live in freedom, that the tech will be deciding what's the truth. I guess it will be the topic of the next year. And I hope I will come with some reasonable answers also, because we are going to invest a lot of energy in looking for the workable solution which will make our democracy better protected against disinformation and false political campaigning without introducing any kind of censorship and damaging the freedom of speech. This will be a heroic task.
Well, everyone, thank you, guests, and enjoy the rest of Web Summit.
Thank you very much.